Hi, my name is Lukas Ligeti, and it's a huge pleasure for me to be here on Composers Now Impact today and to get to share some of my work with you. So I hope you will enjoy the things I'll show you. I have some music for you that many or most of you may not have heard before. Most of it is somewhat new, and it's quite a wide selection of different stuff, most of it unreleased, some of it soon to be released. Um, you know, my story is maybe an unusual one. I certainly have some ancestors who also composed. I think one can say that, and some might know about those, particularly one. But I didn't start composing as a little child. I was always enthusiastic about music, but I really didn't start making any kind of music in any serious way myself until after high school. And when I finally started doing some music, I had this unusual ambition or goal or objective that I really wanted to do something new. I wanted to do something original, not only personal, definitely something personal, but more than that, I wanted to do things that hadn't been done before. Very quickly, I arrived at this idea, and actually, I remain true to this idea today that probably 99% of the expressive possibilities that we have as humans through music, through sound, have not been found yet. So a lot of people say, "Oh, it's all been done before. Now all we can do is recombine things." And I've never actually adopted that idea. That was never my mindset. It's actually exactly the opposite. And I think that uh, if we don't find new things, it's sort of that we only have our own lack of imagination to blame. So I started thinking early on in a very deliberate way how to do new things, um, how to find new ways of thinking about music, new ways of listening to music, new ways of playing together in an ensemble, new rhythms and melodies and harmonies, and trying to really push boundaries, new techniques, finding new ways of making music in all kinds of ways, with electronics, without electronics. I've never been wed to one type of method. I write completely through composed music. I free improvise. I do things in between. I work with electronics. I work without electronics. I try to do as many different things as possible in order to always find new possibilities. And maybe the first piece I'd like to share with you today is a solo piece for marimba called Thinking Songs that was commissioned by a consortium of 16 American marimba players. And we're going to hear it played by the unbelievable, fantastic marimba player Jihei Jung. But when she first rehearsed this piece with me, I was astonished because I didn't know for sure whether what I wrote was really possible. Because what I was asking for, I was really trying to push the limits of the instrument and push boundaries. And I was asking for her to play, holding two mallets in each hand, four completely separate melodic lines that then also become separate rhythmic lines. And I wasn't quite sure whether it was possible because it hadn't really ever been done before on the marimba to write so contrapuntally, in spite of all the Bach transcriptions and so on and so forth. And Jihei told me that in rehearsing and practicing that piece, in order to be able to play it, she had to develop a new section of her brain that she didn't know previously existed. And that made me so happy. I almost had to cry because that's really exactly what I'm trying to do with my music. And I like my music to sound very nice and listenable. It doesn't need to sound unfriendly or abrasive. Sometimes it does, as you'll hear, but it doesn't necessarily. But somehow something is different. So let's listen to part of the third movement of Thinking Songs. It's called Four Part Invention. So this was Thinking Songs played by the magnificent Jihye Jung. And something that you heard in this little excerpt from this fairly long marimba solo piece is that a lot of the melodies I was using were scales. And actually, I love melodies, and I think that my musical invention is mostly based on a melodic imagination, more than any, I think more than anything else, really. But at the same time, I'm also really interested in using very simple types of melodies because I think that in a context where there's so much other complexity taking place. I sometimes think scales are very easy to follow and they let you see the structure of the music in a deeper way. And I thought for today's selection of pieces, I'll feature a couple of pieces that have scalar melodies. So the next piece that we're going to hear also has scales. I'll come to that in a moment. But also, something that you heard is a superimposition of different elements. And that's something that happens a lot in my music. Sometimes the elements are fairly uniform, as here, sometimes they're extremely disparate. That also happens. Very often, I work with polymeters or polytempo structures because I'm thinking that in Western music we've had a simultaneity of pitches, different pitches for a long time, for over 1,000 years now, leading to consonances and dissonances. And so I'm interested in consonances and dissonances of rhythms and of speeds. And that's why I like working with simultaneous speeds. And one of the constant challenges that I've been working with as a composer is how do you make that kind of a thing playable? And that's something that I think I've become better at over the years of making it less difficult to play this because some of my old music was extremely difficult to play. Some of the new one is also still very difficult, but not all of it. And the difficulty of playing has never really been a particular interest of mine. I'm not one of these people who says, "Oh, it has to be hard to play," but it's just a side effect of trying to create new types of structures. So I'd suggest that as the next piece, we listen to the newest piece of mine, the latest piece of mine to be premiered. It's a very short piece called Cadence of Joy that I wrote for the wonderful Del Sol Quartet from San Francisco. And here also you have a simultaneity of different scalar melodies that happen at the same time that create a sort of polyphony and also, if you want, a certain kind of polyrhythm. It's music that is simple and complex at the same time. And another obsession of mine is that I like to work with repetition, but my music doesn't work in the same way as minimal music does. So it's a music that uses repetition, but uses repetition as not maybe the most foregrounded element. Uh, Parts within themselves repeat, but they're superimposed again in different and disparate ways. So let's listen to a little bit, a short excerpt, the beginning of Cadence of Joy. Cadence of Joy with a masked Del Sol quartet. It's a wonderful thing for me to be able to work with Del Sol, a really great string quartet. It's a very contemporary image with the masked musicians. I really hope uh, we soon find a way out of this very, very crazy situation that we're in, where we all have to be scared of infecting each other all the time. I'd rather infect with good ideas than with a disease. And so I'll try to continue making these good ideas come, but it's not easy these days, right? So very often in interviews, I'm asked if my father's music has been an influence on me, and of course, it would be completely a lie if I said it hasn't been. It's been a huge influence all along. But I would say that during my early days as a composer, I tried very hard to avoid an audible influence because I really wanted to scope out my own territory. And then, as time went on, I became, I think, more open to incorporating influences, not only from the work that he was doing when I was already getting into music myself, which was very much also about polymetrics and new types of harmonies, definitely interests that I've taken over from him. But then there's some things that I am interested in that he wasn't so interested in, like free improvisation. We'll hear more improvised things later on. But um, I guess a micro polyphonic influence also started creeping in. And in the next excerpt that we're going to hear, which is from a chamber orchestra piece for 15 musicians called Curtain, I think that becomes obvious here. This piece is about not so much about scales, but about small scale vibrations of pitch relationships. So kind of tremoli and back and forth, and also I always like working with triads and different distortions of triads. I think it's very interesting to flirt with tonality, but never quite to go there. So I definitely don't work with functional tonality, but I do work with elements that evoke tonality. I think it's pleasing to the ear. It gives you something known to sort of latch onto while taking a trip into the unknown. Now, in Curtain, a piece that was commissioned by the Austrian Cultural Institute in New York City or the Austrian Cultural Forum, I should say, back in 2015, a string quartet is sort of featured in an anti-concerto grosso format. So, in other words, this string quartet is constantly being painted over by the rest of the ensemble of 11 people, so 15 in total. And let us listen to a little of this played by another really fantastic ensemble, the Avanti Chamber Orchestra from Helsinki in Finland, conducted by Clement Power. that was a section from Curtain for chamber orchestra, played by Avanti from Finland. So the couple of pieces of mine that I've shared with you so far were for, let's say, conventional instrumental forces without electronics and also didn't include any improvisation. So, to continue this voyage through some of my more recent or recentish music, I'd like to turn to music that does use technology, let's say electronics. Let's not call it technology because a violin is also technology, right? So, um, uh, electronics in some way, and then we'll also get into pieces that feature more improvisation. The next piece I'd like to share with you is a piece for toy piano and sampled toy piano. It came about because back in 2013, I think it was, I entered a composition competition, which is something I don't do very often somehow, but I did in that case. It was called the Uncaged Toy Piano competition. And my entry uh, happened to be selected, and I then was commissioned by the great toy pianist Phyllis Chen to write a piece for her. And so, Play Addict is the name of this piece. We're going to hear it played by Jennifer Heimer, a wonderful pianist and toy pianist based in Hamburg, Germany. And this piece uses, again, scalar melodies, and it uses a kind of fusion between the live and the sampled toy piano, the sampled toy piano also being played live, but via a little MIDI keyboard. The way I use electronics is maybe a little bit different from a lot of other composers. I actually use it in many different ways. But I would say that maybe the mainstream of exploration with electronics tends to, for most people, tends to be timbral. And for me, actually, electronics is more of a means to create new musical structures. So in this case, new scalar structures and new superimpositions. Again, a little bit the same idea as we heard in some of the other pieces today. But I also, as we will see later on, like to use technology as a sort of mediator between musicians. But for starters, let's listen to a short excerpt from Play Addict for both live and sampled toy piano. Just a short excerpt from Play Addict, played by the wonderful Jennifer Heimer. Um, this is a brand new video that has, I don't think, ever been shown before, and will, I'm sure, be online soon. Um, in 2019, which in this situation we're in seems like an eternity ago, but really it was less than a year and a half ago, I had a really wonderful opportunity to work in a place and with people I'd never worked with before. I was invited by the experimental music organization Sonoscopia in Porto, in Portugal, to be their artist in residence for a while and to work to develop with them a new composition uh, based on and around Phobos, a sort of robot orchestra that they constructed. It is a an electromechanic solenoidal sound sculpture, one could say, that can come in a lot of different forms. And it makes all kinds of different sounds, percussive sounds, sometimes plucking strings or bowing strings, all kinds of things. And it's really fascinating and multifaceted and very interesting. And it also is somewhat moody. And that means that in performance, one can never be 100% sure that it's going to do things as planned. And while I use a lot of improvisation in my work, randomness is something that I've eschewed mostly. I don't consider improvisation randomness at all. But when dealing with a sound sculpture that is not 100% predictable, I had to be aware that, I had to sort of plan this kind of unpredictability, which is not based on a person's, accumulation of life experiences and personal vocabulary as it would be in an improvised setting, but real kind of raw unpredictability. I had to try to incorporate that. The piece that I'm going to share with you now, it's called A Human Automata, and it is for this for both sound sculpture and an ensemble of improvising musicians. We experimented with all kinds of interesting forms of interplay with this sound sculpture. And in the excerpt that you're going to hear, what we're doing is that we're taking a rhythm and we are sort of imitating this rhythm throughout the ensemble, and it going through changes. And the result is quite wild. So let's listen to a minute or so of that. So this was the Sonoscopia Ensemble from Porto in Portugal that I worked with in 2019. Wonderful group of people running this association. Hope to work with them again in the future and continue this project. And the instruments range from bent circuits to piano and harp and cello. I was playing the marimba lumina, a MIDI controller designed by the late Don Buchla that I play in a lot of contexts. I'm a drummer, and I also play this marimba lumina. That's kind of my electronic main acts. And I really like to perform also when I play electronics. The next piece we're going to hear is a very special project, and it's special also because it is just about to be released on CD. Back in 2015, I was artist in residence at the Museum of the History of Polish Jews in Warsaw. And that was a very interesting experience for me because I am of Jewish origin myself, but I never really had the chance to examine that heritage or that history that I have in uh, the scope of a composition, much less a piece for a community. Now, my own heritage is not from Poland, and I had never been to Poland actually before. In the meantime, I've been a couple of times, and it's actually a really wonderful country to work on experimental music. People are so open-minded and interested there. And in this project with the museum, I worked with some really, really fantastic local musicians based in Warsaw. And what I did for this project is I interviewed people um, about their connection to Jewish history and culture and life in Warsaw. Among the people I interviewed, and you'll see him very, very briefly in the video that we're going to look at it, in a moment, was Henryk Preis, at the time the oldest living Jew and Holocaust survivor in Poland. He was 98. He passed away, unfortunately, in the meantime, at the age of 101. but also people who are very young and not necessarily Jewish. I don't go by identity categories. So for me, the important thing is, does somebody have something interesting to say? So I interviewed these people, and then I um, also asked them to sing songs that they associate with Jewish life in Poland. And then I took all of these uh, field recordings, if you want, and I gave them to improvising musicians. I wrote a score and I gave different fragments of these interviews to improvising musicians to listen to over headphones. And I think in the video that we're going to see, I explained that a little bit. Um, the piece is called That Which Has Remained, That Which Will Emerge. And it's really a piece about memory and about the resilience of culture, and even in situations of severe oppression and genocide. And this piece, I'm very happy to say, is just about to be released on CD in on the record label Collegno, a fantastic Austrian label that is well distributed in the U.S. So you will find this record, and please check it out. Um, Another aspect that this piece has is audience participation. So the musicians were listening to interview fragments via headphones, but then audience members could also go and pick up headphones and listen to what some of the musicians were listening to and sing along with that. And that audience participation is an important part of the live version of the piece, but not part of the recorded version. So here in this little video, we'll see some footage of the premiere of this piece in Warsaw back in 2015. Video's a little wobbly, but I think it'll still give you a nice impression of the atmosphere of the concert. Topic that this whole piece is basically about. It's about memories and relationships of and to the Jewish community here. And well, I think the first thing I should say is that even though this is being called my composition, in truth, most of the sounds that you heard were not by me, because they were based on speaking and singing that I recorded of people here in Warsaw and surroundings in the last couple of weeks, as well as, of course, the contributions of the musicians who played the piece with me.
Mir seinen Kalutzen, mir bojen kibutzen, mit inser starke Hand, mir gebojen inser.
And my role playing this piece was rather an internal one, of a sort of conductor. I also did make some sounds, but I would say probably more than 90% of the sounds that you've heard were made by my musician colleagues, and the majority of those sounds were improvised based on information I gave them. And each musician had a different soundtrack playing in their headphones. And then I gave them directions. Sometimes they would hear the same sound at the same time. Sometimes they would hear different sounds. And these sounds were sometimes speech. Sometimes they were songs sung by these volunteers. But sometimes also they were metronomes, for example. But the whole piece is about memory and about kind of indirect thoughts. And I think that by taking these memories and then putting them in the ears of musicians who then again make something else out of it. They don't play exactly what they're hearing. Sometimes they play as exactly as they can what they're hearing, and sometimes they associate freely musically based on this. I could not give a walkthrough of my recent work without mentioning at least briefly my work in Africa with musicians there. It's a very, very important component of my work that I've been doing now for about 27 years, exactly 27 years ago. Pretty much today, I had my first concert with musicians in Africa in the Ivory Coast. I continue working today with some of the same musicians, a group we founded then called Beta Folie. It's no longer around, but there is a successor project called Burkina Electric that has toured a lot in the US also. And I'd like to conclude today with a short excerpt from a live concert by Burkina Electric. Um, what I call experimental intercultural collaboration is a really important component of my work that influences everything I do. And what I mean by this is coming together with musicians from other cultural backgrounds, working in collaboration as equals. We don't need a band leader or anything like that. We work as equals, and we try to experiment to do something deliberately new. And I've got to tell you, in the current political atmosphere that we're in, I consider that to be more important than ever because, so much today seems to be based on identity politics. And I want to be very clear in saying that I do not endorse this kind of attitude. I think it would be impossible for me to do my intercultural work were I to see my partners now, in the case of Burkina Electric, I can say they're my family because we've been working, they're such close friends and we've been working for such a long time. But in order to work productively together across these boundaries of cultures and parts of the world, we need to establish equality and we need to establish mutual trust. And in order to do that, I don't think it's possible to see people as representatives of cultures or of countries, of races, of religions, of genders. No, I see people as individuals and I work with them because of their individual contributions that they can make, their knowledge that they can bring to the table, and their characters, just like I can bring my own. And what we do then is we pool our knowledge and we try to come up with something new. And I believe that that is really essential, that we don't fragment ourselves. As humans, we share 98% or 99%. I said 99% of the possibilities have not been used yet of expression in music. And now I'm going to say 99% again to end this show, to say 99% of things we across cultures we share. And we shouldn't overstate the differences and we shouldn't overstate the similarities either. We should be aware of both and try to make the best and try to empower all of us together. It's about coming together for me. It's not that music is a universal language. It isn't. And that's exactly why we need to pool our knowledge. But I'd like to end this on a lighter note, an excerpt from a concert by Burkina Electric, which at its heart is an electronic pop band based in Burkina Faso in West Africa, just playing our music that you can dance to. That we are dancing to. We've worked with, our next project coming up is going to be with the Brussels Philharmonic Orchestra in November 2021. So we do all kinds of eclectic and cross-cultural projects. But here we're just playing a concert back in, I think, the year 2014. And I'd like you to dance with us and let's all end this together and really let's all come together and say that we can celebrate our shared society and joint humanity. I want to thank everyone at Composers Now, Tanya Leon, Andres Leon, Amy Frawley, David Bridges, of course, Trudy Chan, for setting this up and making this possible. It's really been a great pleasure to be with you here and let us look at Burkina Electric. And I hope we can all see this group live again soon when we have normal live concerts again, hopefully later this year. Thank you so much.